Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so let me go ahead and grab my new King Henry VIII coffee mug. It's got all of his wives on it and stuff. And let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? So, in class today, I'm kind of predicting this a little bit because I have a meeting at the end of the day, so we're making a flip, trying to see how far we got. But I know that we are going to end up going over what Parliament does, how many houses it has, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the big thing that we got to get into in tonight's flip is the rise of the Stuarts, right? So this family, known as the Stuart family, is going to be the one that takes control over England, right? So now the Stuarts are originally, jot this down, Scottish rulers, all right? So the Stuart family are the leaders of Scotland, okay? So they were originally Catholic, all right? That will change as time goes on, though, okay? But the biggest thing you need to know is the last thing we talked about with Parliament. We know that the Tudors worked really well with Parliament. Speaking of the Tudors, Henry VIII worked very well with Parliament. They helped him agree to separate and create a new church, right? So the Anglican Church, right? And as we know, Henry's going to foster a lot of negative Anglican opinion or negative Catholic opinions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So the biggest and most important thing about the Stuarts, though, not the Stuarts, the Tudors, is that the very last one of them, Elizabeth, is going to die in 1603, all right? So in 1603, Elizabeth dies, right? Now, the throne was supposed to pass to her child, but of course, as we know, Elizabeth never got married, all right? So, and since Elizabeth never got married, it's going to end up going to her closest cousins, the Stuarts, right? Now, the person that was the surviving Stuart at the time was supposed to be Mary, Queen of Scots, right? So because she's the Queen of the Scottish. This is her right here, right? Looks kind of like Elizabeth, they're first cousins. It's her closest cousin, and she was going to end up taking over, but she's dead, all right? So she's dead because Elizabeth had her executed in this insane story. But a lot of it comes down to the fact that Elizabeth thought that Mary was out to get her and to take the throne from her, to take England back to Catholicism, right? Because Mary was a longtime Catholic. Mary, Queen of Scots, just like her sister, Bloody Mary, two very different women, all right? Mary, Queen of Scots, was a Catholic woman from Scotland, okay? Bloody Mary, Catholic English Tudor, all right? So two very different people. Now, the thing about it is some of you are like, well, why was she executed? I don't get it. So Mary, Queen of Scots, may have actually had her husband smothered to death in his sleep so she could then run off and marry somebody else. So when the authorities start to try and chase her down, they end up not catching her because she runs to England to seek safe haven with Elizabeth. Elizabeth then believes that Mary's out to get her, gets real paranoid, and then has Mary, Queen of Scots locked away, right? Locked up for 18 straight years, right? Well, some of you are like, well, wait a minute, Mr. Terry. If she's the Queen of the Scottish, yes, and she was locked up for 18 years, yes, Randy, okay, Schexnayder, you got it, all right, so then who was the King of the Scots while she was locked up? That's a great question. Her 1-year-old son, James, all right? James the 6th of Scotland. But here's the thing. James the 6th of Scotland, since Mary, Queen of Scots, is now dead, is now the closest living relative to Elizabeth. So who takes the throne of England? No other than James the 6th of Scotland, right? And James the 6th of Scotland is going to end up garnering himself a new name, right? He's going to be referred to as, hold up, he's going to be referred to as James the 1st and the 6th, right? Because he's the first James of England, and that's a 50. He's the first James of England and the 6th James of Scotland, right? So when he comes to power, he is going to successfully unite the thrones of Scotland and England, right? So they come together now underneath this new ruler who has been in charge of Scotland for over 18 years, right? So he's an experienced ruler. Now, the thing about it, though, is James's personality, right? So as we can see, James right here, he's wearing his sweet stockings, looking nice, all right, I guess, because apparently pantyhose were invented for men. Originally, they actually were, because women apparently were into the slimness and contours of a man's legs. Don't ask me why people are into these things in the 1600s. They just are. Now, even though ironically enough, skinny jeans are now a thing. But whatever. So the biggest thing is that James the First/6th is going to ascend the throne. Now, this is what he looked like when he was in Scotland, all right? So, like, when he was ruling over different things, and this is his personal portrait. This is what James believed he should look like. An absolutist with complete authority, right? A king, a gown, extravagance, over-the-top luxury, right? To give you a little bit of an inkling as to what I'm getting at, all right? This is Louis the 14th. The man that your state is named after, right? Louis the 14th looked like this in his royal portrait, in his regard. Notice the similarities. This is Louis the 14th's most famous absolute portrait, right? Look at the big cape with the spots and the pantyhose and the heels and the extravagance, and he's not wearing a crown because he's much more into wigs. All right, but now look at James. Almost identical in terms of outfit. All right, so James believes that he is an absolutist, devoutly believes these things, right? But as we talked about in class, right, absolutism is not allowed in England because they're a constitutional system, right? They are a constitutional monarchy. They don't allow absolutism, right? So because they have a document known as the Magna Carta that refuses to allow any ruler to take absolute authority, right? So with that, James the First of England, again, see what happened there, hates Parliament, all right? So he despises Parliament with a fiery passion. Can't stand them, thinks they're garbage, wants them gone, right? Because he believes in the divine right of kings, right? So when we talked about the ABCDs of absolutism, we talked about Charles V, we talked about Philip II, we talked about a couple of these different absolutists. They all believed they were appointed by God to rule over their people, right? And James was also a scholar. He was very, very well educated, could speak multiple different languages, was very into philosophy, and he believed he was smarter than everybody he was around, so he's the one that should be in charge, right? So he's very arrogant about his intelligence, right? And he also believes that he should be hidden away, ruling from a palace, not going to the parliament for approval for anything. All right? Because we talked about what the parliament does today. It protects people. It keeps their basic rights in check, and they choose when or when not to raise taxes, right? So James hates this because he believes that God gave him the power to rule, and he should be allowed to do whatever he wants and raise money or take money however he chooses, right? Because he thinks he's an absolute ruler. He thinks he's over the top. He thinks he's extreme. He thinks he's really, really into this whole thing, right? The thing about it is, he's got problems with his reign early on, right? His biggest problems are the fact that the parliament, guess what, also doesn't like him very much, right? He also can't stand Puritans, okay? So let's go ahead and explain this really, really quick, okay? Because we're going to take a couple more minutes and we're going to get into this a little bit, all right? So there's a couple of different types of faiths or religion banging around in England during this time, right? So originally you had your boy, right? Henry VIII, who's going to be the first person to separate the Church of England away from the, the Catholic Church. So you've got Catholics still in England versus, that are still kind of running around, right, like the Bloody Mary Catholics, versus the Anglicans now, right? But here's the thing. We talked about this before. Anglicanism is just kind of diet Catholic, right? They still take Eucharist. They still do a lot of the same like rituals. They don't have like bishops or cardinals. They don't have like the church hierarchy because it's believed that the king is supposed to be the leader of that whole thing, right? But the thing about it is Anglicans were anti-Catholic. But then there were some people that were anti-Anglican, and they're called Puritans, right? Now, why are the Puritans also on this side? Because they're also Protestant, all right? So the Puritans are the people, the Anglicans, that ran away when Bloody Mary was in charge and she was executing everybody, right? So when she's executing everyone, they go to Switzerland and actually learn Calvinism from people like John Calvin. Now remember, John Calvin preached Calvinism, and they're very strict. wear black and white only, nothing gaudy, no distractions from God, no makeup, no celebrations, no drinking, no exercise or work of any type on Sundays, or you could be fined, right? So Puritans are like that, all right? They believe that Anglicans are too much like Catholics. So right now, the Anglicans are kind of being attacked on both sides, right? So James, who is Anglican, hates Catholics and Puritans. This is a big problem he's got to deal with, right? Now, the Catholics are kind of on the run. They're not really a huge threat to him, but the Puritans, on the other hand, are, right? They're very, very annoying. Their population is growing. They're also very cheap. They're very frugal. They're not going to want to pay more taxes because they believe in this thing called the Protestant work ethic, and they're also starting to kind of infiltrate the Parliament or the House of Commons, right? The House of Commons has several people within it that are Puritans, right? So they're starting to have some say over the government. He hates this, all right? So also the biggest problem that he has is he wants more money. He wants more money because he wants to be able to spend it on whatever he wants. He wants to do whatever he wants, and he wants to be able to like have a big grand palace and do everything he actually wants to do. Now the thing about it though, guys, is the fact that James is really not known for a ton of different things. He has a couple of big accolades. You need to jot these down. James's biggest accolades as a king: Jamestown, Virginia, settled in 1607. All right, so Jamestown, named after him, right? The first permanent English settlement was made under him, right? He kicked some Puritans out called the Puritan Separatists, and they went and settled Plymouth in 1610, also known as Plymouth, the Plymouth colony, right? The Mayflower. And then also his other biggest thing is he had the Bible translated into vernacular English. It's called the King James Version of the Bible. It's the version that y'all use in religion class, all right? So as you can see, he did a couple of different things, but he believed it still, no matter what, in his absolute authority, right? He wanted to have a grander palace at Whitehall. He wanted to have a bigger army. He wanted to have all these different things, but he couldn't, all right? So he believed in this divine right, and he vouched for it all the time, and he always was asking for more money, but the Parliament would always shut him down, all right? So James also was much more concerned with parties and living outside of public life, right? He thought that you should rule from home, right? Away from everybody else. Jot that down. He thought you should be ruling from a palace and not even communicating with people. God forbid he go down to the Parliament and talk to them, right? He actually at one point said, I'd rather show all of England my butt than go down there and talk to them. All right, so like literally, he actually said this in not so subtle words. He literally said, I would rather pull down me britches and show them me arse. All right, so like, sorry for the cursing, but it's ARSE. It's a little different. All right, so anyway, now, he's a very, very staunch guy, but he's just the example of the first Stuart, all right? And we're going to talk tomorrow, get into a little bit about his son, Charles, and how he's going to massively affect everything, all right? So I'll see you guys then. Y'all have a good one. Bye.